Welcome to the CAAA Commercial Concierge Desk, our monthly panel show with top tips and tricks on how you can maximize your commercial life. Our experts will provide you with the latest information and top industry tips on how you can make your next commercial venture a successful one. This month, our panel will share with you the top 10 tips and tricks for setting up a company. Let me introduce you to our experts this month. Jason Ockleshaw, Business Services Manager, Marina Firth, Marketing Manager, and Leanne Atkins, our Business Services Consultant. I am Karim Giovanni, a Director at CAAA and your host. Setting up a company in Australia is a relatively simple process, but there are always a few tips and tricks that will ensure your company is set up right. Remember, a company is business critical infrastructure and could end up being the cornerstone for your next financial strategies. Setting up with a strong foundation can pay dividends by eliminating headaches later. Companies in Australia are governed by the Corporations Act, which in turn is administered by ASIC. It's always best to consult your accountant to make sure that your company is set up correctly and meets all the legal requirements. Jason, what is the first step you should take?
Well, the first step, Karam, on your agenda should be to decide who the directors are going to be. Put simply, the directors are the ones who are exposed to the risks of the company. Some of those risks might be financial, operational, legal, regulatory, or any other. So you need to pick your directors pretty carefully. You should also consider a proper asset protection strategy and trust that your chosen directors are going to work within that strategy.
It is also worth remembering that at least one of your directors ordinarily reside in Australia.
That's absolutely correct, Karam. You should also be aware of other regulations that govern your candidates for directorship. Some of those regulations might be state or federal based. For example, if you're running a medical practice, the doctor will also need to be a director of the company.
What about foreign companies?
If you're a foreign company registered to operate within Australia, you generally have directors that also reside outside of Australia. You'll need to appoint an ASIC agent that's local to Australia. This is a very complex process and should only really be attended to by your accountant.
Now that we've decided who the directors are, what's the next step we can take? Leanne?
The next big ticket item to consider is who your shareholders will be. So you need to think of critical factors like protecting your assets. Is the person or entity at risk? Will the shares be exposed? You also need to think about taxation. Is the company likely to pay dividends? If so, how much? Will the shareholders be able to accept them in a tax-effective way? Regulation. Is there any regulatory reason to hold the shares one way or another? For example, like professional body or licence regulations.
And do the same considerations apply to foreign companies?
If your shareholder happens to be a foreign company, this will result in your company being classified as a foreign controlled corporation or FCC. You may be required to have your financial statements audited annually by a registered company auditor and then filed with ASIC. There is a process where you can seek an annual exemption from this by application to ASIC. This is not a DIY process, so please talk to your accountant.
Once you've decided who the shareholders are, you'll need to consider what kind of shares you will issue. What are the options, Jason?
If your company is set up with good documents, you should have plenty of options with the type of shares you can issue. Some common variations of these shares include the following. Ordinary shares, as the name suggests, these are pretty basic shares with full rights. You can vote, you can notice of attend meetings, and have rights to dividends and a return of capital if the company is ever wound up. Dividend shares, typically these shares just have rights to dividends but very little else. Preference shares typically have preferred rights to dividends and on occasion fixed income rights. A to Z shares, often documents will create a class of shares for each letter of the alphabet with slightly different rights with respect to notice of attendance to meetings, voting rights, rights to dividends and access to return capital if the company is ever closed or wound up.
So you get the gist of this. The careful selection of the type of shares you issue and to whom will help you fine-tune who controls the company. Leanne, what's next?
The next step is to determine where you will set up your registered office. The Corporations Act stipulates that all companies must have a registered office. This office or address serves as the guaranteed access point for formal communication of a legal nature with your company. In short, when something is delivered to your registered office, it is considered to have been delivered to you. So it's super important that the location of your registered office is open during business hours and is well managed. This office can be your place of business or home, but unless you want legal documents or the sheriff to turn up there in the event of a dispute, it's best to have your registered office at your accountant's or lawyer's office, who will attend to such matters for a modest annual fee.
So far so good? We are now halfway to setting up your company. If you are a public company, you're required to have a company secretary. Jason, what guidelines should we follow here?
As a general guide, bigger companies with active boards of directors will have a company secretary to manage the business of the board. The secretary deals with board meetings, governance, corporate secretarial matters, and dealings with shareholders and ASIC. Private companies don't generally need to worry about this step at all.
Now that you've worked out the structure, you are ready to register your company. Leanne, what's the easiest way to do this?
You have two options for this. The first is to simply register your company with ASIC. This is fast and the lowest cost to you. However, it is recommended that you engage an accountant, a lawyer or quality online provider to set up your company, to provide a full constitution to govern your company, along with a comprehensive set of documents and registers you can use for legal and banking matters. This is well worth the minor additional cost as it lowers risk, especially if this is your first company.
Great. And Jason, are we now ready to trade?
To begin to trade, your company is going to have some mandatory tax registrations. It's really important to consult your accountant at this stage, as this is where many costly legal problems can arise later on down the track. Some of those mandatory registrations would include things like tax file number, Australian business number, GST registration, pay-as-you-go registration, payroll taxes, there's land taxes, stamp duty, import duties, gaming taxes, and the list really goes on, Karam.
Now that all the compliance is in order, it's time to get creative. Your company is going to need a good name to trade under. Marina, how do we find a good name?
Well, the first thing to consider is if the name you want is lawful. You can use words, numbers, and some special characters. However, some words like bank, trust, royal, and incorporated are restricted. Similarly, implying affiliation to a government or a profession to which you don't belong is also prohibited. The next step is to see if the name you want is available, and you can do this on the ASIC website. It's also good practice to see if your name may be similar to a pre-existing trademark, and you can do that through IPA Australia. Another good idea is checking to see if the domain name is free should you wish to have a website, and you can do that on affiliates.com.au.
Wow, that was a lot of information to take in. So let's do a quick recap of what you need to set up a company in Australia. You'll need directors, shareholders, share rights, registered office, taxation, and a company name. You're all set to go now. If this isn't your first company setup, you may feel confident to set it up yourself. If not, speak to your accountant and get a little help and advice. If you enjoyed the show, please hit the subscribe button and ring that bell. For more information and a complete checklist and resources, head to our website www.CAAA.biz. Or if you have any questions, shoot us an email on info@CAAA.biz. Thank you for watching.